Hi everybody, welcome back to Opal Earth. My name is Cheryl Casper, and I am an instructor of opal carving and opal cutting. Today we're going to talk about a very simple but important concept when we carve opal, and that is very simply wrapping sandpaper around a split mandrel. This is done very often. It's a very common tool in opal carving, and it's because sandpaper on a split mandrel will yield and flex a little bit. So it's a good transition to go from a metal bit into a blending process. And putting sandpaper with that flexibility and yield makes it an ideal choice before polishing. Now you can use Nova bits for this process, but if you have trouble with Nova bits, if they get too hot for you, if they don't have enough yield or flexibility for you, or if they're simply too big to reach the areas that you need to reach, then you might consider using sandpaper on a split mandrel. So today, we're going to learn how to make and use sandpaper on split mandrels. Very simple, short concept. Stay with us. So you need to choose the materials you're going to use. First, let's start with a sandpaper. You could use a silicon carbide if you wanted to, which will be fine, it will wear out quicker. Or you could use diamond grit. In this case, we're going to use silicon carbide at a 400 grit. Choose your grit carefully because you want to blend. You want to use this as a blending step. So somewhere between, let's say, 200 and about 1200 ought to be the paper that you go to the most. Typically for me, it's somewhere between a 400 and a 600 is where I really need sandpaper. You're going to need a split mandrel, either tapered or straight. You're going to need some tape. You're going to need a pair of scissors. So here, I simply have a block of styrofoam that I've wrapped with tape and marked the grits that I have available on my sandpaper bits to help me keep them organized. Start by simply cutting a piece of sandpaper to a small triangle about 1.5 inches by 3 inches long. Take your split mandrel and place it on the corner of the paper. Now sometimes the paper will go one way or the other way depending upon which way the cut was made. And in order for you to utilize all of the paper, you might end up with some bits being rolled in one direction and some in the other direction. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But take the short end of the split mandrel and put it on the short corner as such. And roll the mandrel around so that the point of the paper forms into a point that you can use to help you get into small places on your carving. Sometimes it helps to roll the paper a little bit with your fingers to help you get a tighter fit on that point. As you work your way around with the sandpaper, you might notice that you need to trim a bit of the end of it and still have enough of the bit left to fit into the handpiece of the micromotor. Once you've rolled the sandpaper sufficiently around the bit, wrap the paper with your finger as much as you can to tie in the loose ends of the paper. Now doing this won't hold the paper in completely, but it will help to tuck in those ends. So now take a piece of tape and wrap it around the base of the paper. And smooth the tape into place. Remember to mark what grit it is on the bit itself. I like to put this on the tape. You can see that here I've used tape, but sometimes I use super glue. And I can take a paint marker and actually mark the grit directly on the paper itself. Split mandrels come in a variety of shapes. For our purposes, we'll use tapered and straight. The tapered shape lets us create more of a point to get into those hard-to-reach places, while the straight shape creates parallel sides for carving broader areas of your stone. Now let's talk about how we use the sandpaper bit. It's very important to use this bit on a slow speed. Because it's handmade, it can be very imbalanced. And if you're not careful, it will spin and get off balance and break off and fly across the room. Put your micromotor setting on slow. Anytime that you're using handmade bits, be especially careful with the speed. Now let's talk about the direction that you'll use this bit. Depending if you started with the left side or the right side to roll that paper up, you'll notice that the bit will roll one way or the other way. And as you turn your machine on, it will spin in a specific direction. If that direction is moving towards the stone, then you need to turn the machine in the opposite direction. So you want to make sure that the bit is flowing away from the stone so that it doesn't get caught on the stone. And when you do this, simply go to your micromotor or your Fordham, Dremel, whatever tool you're using, and put it in the opposite turn direction. In this case with the micromotor, there's simply a switch on the side that allows you to make that from forward to reverse. But make sure that you turn it back after you're done, or else you might be using a screw mandrel, and that screw might come undone and fly across the room as well. Ask me how I know. I've had this happen before. So please just keep an eye on the direction of your bits. Make sure that you keep your sandpaper bit and your stone wet while you're working. Sandpaper bits are especially good at keeping the stone moist because the water gathers inside the folds of the sandpaper that's rolled up. And so they slowly release that water as you use them, and they have a tendency not to dry out quite as quickly. That's particularly nice to keep your stone wet and cool. You'll notice that this bit has a particular amount of give. Part of that is because it's sandpaper, and it extends past the metal that's inside, so that yield is a little bit easier. So you can see how this would be more flexible than metal or than some of the other options that we mentioned before. This paper will eventually wear out, and you'll need to trim it a little bit as it does. When the grit starts to wear out, you can renew the grit by simply peeling off the used surface to uncover new, unused grit underneath. Sandpaper bits are ideal for using for blending and sanding the rough surfaces off of your stone that the metal bits might have made. Because the sandpaper is able to get into spots and move with the stone, and therefore is not creating new flat surfaces. So thanks for joining us for Wrapping Sandpaper Mandrels. Join us again on Opal Earth.